Are you wanting to get to some breaking news? Apple is out with its earnings. You can see the shares up after hours, up just about 1.5%. Dan Halley, what can you tell us?
That's right, Shauna. We saw revenue that's mostly flat. It's at $83 billion. That's versus expectations of 82.7 billion. It also, though, beat on earnings per share. It came out at $1.20. That's versus $1.16 expected. I think the big news here is that the iPhone revenue beat. Now, there were a lot of fears going on about whether or not inflation would impact this or not, but iPhone revenue came in at $40.7 billion. That's versus the expectations of $38.9 billion. So obviously, still a lot to digest here from Apple, but clearly a good report. We're seeing the stock up just a little bit under 2%, 1.6% right now.
It certainly looks like these numbers were enough here to excite the street. You mentioned revenue beating expectations, coming in at $83 billion. The estimate was for $82.76 billion. iPad revenue also beating the street's expectations, $7.22 billion. Products revenue, $63 billion, better than what we were expecting to see. Services revenue, Dave, we talk about the importance of services to Apple's future. That coming in at $19.6 billion, pretty much right in line with what the street was expecting. But certainly it looks like Apple placing more of an emphasis on services going forward. And this latest print looks like they're actually doing an okay job, at least at this point.
Well, okay, and then you consider all the headwinds. I think you almost have to factor in all those and say this is pretty spectacular, because most analysts expected their first iPhone sales decline in 2 years. Most did not expect this type of success. And we mentioned those headwinds, in particular the China lockdowns, the supply chain issues. They had to begin discounting the iPhone in China, which we rarely, if ever, see from Apple. They've had to cut back in Russia. They've had recessionary fears, supply shortages, just dozens of headwinds. And yet, as we talked about off the top of the show, just another sign of Apple being able to sustain their dominance. And we've seen slowing iPhone sales because of these recessionary fears and because of inflation. And Apple just continues to rise above, Rochelle.
I mean, when you think of the fact that we're in a time where consumers are doing really, some technical math here when it comes to their discretionary spending, to still see that iPhone sales still remaining resilient. And this is in light of the fact that Apple actually has a higher reliance on consumer sales than some of these other tech hardware companies. So to still see them pulling ahead in that regard, I think is very impressive. We did see, though, in a research note on Tuesday from Bank of America's global research analyst, Wamsi Mohan, he said that we could potentially see the large headwinds actually show up in the September quarter. So it could be that we may have not seen the worst of it yet, but at least for now, Apple certainly ahead of the pack here, stock up 2.5% in after-hours trading.
Yeah, iPhone and services driving that June quarter record that we've been talking about. Dan, another thing sticking out to me here, active installed base of devices reaching an all-time high for all major product categories.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing for Apple. And, we were talking about services in the long run. Obviously, they missed services just a hair, but still doing very good with that $19.6 billion. But that install base, that is what a lot of analysts point to as far as moving forward and really kind of pushing Apple into the next stratosphere. So we had Morgan Stanley last week saying that is what will push the company above the $3 trillion mark again. You'll remember back in January, they crossed that barrier. They fell back. Now they're at $2.5 trillion. That's along with the rest of the tech industry kind of falling down as we've seen stocks retreat recently. But that seems to be the big bet there, is on services into the future with that install base of locked-in users.